lot keeps being made of some comments that Joe Rogan made, and this isn't new to Joe. Joe has been banging the drum of a referee overhaul, a judging overhaul for a meaningful period of time. Now, Joe's opinion matters. Joe is very influential in this space, but for anybody that's a new fan, it's very important that you understand the timeline of Joe. Because when you're talking about judges or officials of any kind, sincerity matters. If they are sincerely trying to learn the sport, observe the sport, watch themselves after the fact, watch the competition after the fact, see if they came to the same conclusion from something that they would see differently. If they are sincere about their intentions, that's a huge box that just got checked. I mean, anybody that would make believe that judging is anything less than subjective for anybody. I'm a big gymnastics fan. I liked rodeo. Not a lot, but my father used to ride in rodeo, so I kind of grew up on that a little bit. But my dad would always tell me, hey, whenever you have people judging people, it's never going to be fair. It's never going to be perfect, but you get as close to fair and you get as close to perfect as you can. And that's just the way it is. And what's fair about that is your competition and your opponent lives under those same rules. So if the people who are doing it are trying sincerely to do their level best, it matters. Now, when I use the word sincere as it pertains to Joe Rogan, and this would be for new fans, the UFC didn't used to be an international juggernaut. It was not even a national juggernaut. It was licensed and legal and allowed in one jurisdiction. Very quickly, it was allowed in two. And sometimes that story gets blended to where it was New Jersey and Nevada, but it wasn't. It was Nevada, quickly New Jersey came. My point is all the same. It was very small. To call it a regional show would be very accurate. At the same time, to call it the biggest show in the world would also be very accurate. There was no other show that was competing on two different parts of the country, being produced and shown on pay-per-view, signing talent from around the world. So it would be fair to say that the UFC was the biggest show in the world. That's true. It's also very fair to say that it was a very small show. Trying to gain traction, trying to gain mainstream attention. Hard thing to do. Could you imagine starting something? Anything, but could you imagine starting something? That's the first thing you'd want. You'd want to have a base, whatever number that was, 500, whatever it was, and ignite that fire, hope they tell people and grow from there, right? I mean, pretty basic common sense, but the UFC was also in that spot. Joe Rogan was a fan, and Joe Rogan was a jiu-jitsu practitioner under Eddie Bravo, and Joe Rogan had grown up doing Taekwondo, so he had a good understanding of martial arts, but more than anything, he had a sincere passion for mixed martial arts. Now, Joe Rogan was on something called The Man Show, and The Man Show did great ratings. This was a great show with great ratings. I want to say Jimmy Kimmel was on The Man Show. I know Adam Carolla was on The Man Show. The host revault, but he had Joe Rogan. And it did big things, and Joe Rogan would show up on the show, and he would be wearing a sweatshirt that said UFC. That exposure to those three little letters gained more exposure from a rating standpoint than even a pay-per-view where a world title was contested. It was a huge deal that Joe Rogan, some random guy, who I don't even believe knew Dana White. I don't know that he knew any fighters. He was really locked into the jiu-jitsu circles. Was doing this to be friends with somebody, was doing somebody a favor. He was a sincere guy that believed, saw something, had a passion, and wanted to help to get the word out. At some point, he does meet Dana White, and Joe Rogan says, I want to be your commentator. And Dana's like, man, I'd love for you to be my commentator, but guess what? Let me let you in on a little secret. I don't have any money to pay you. We're barely keeping the lights on around here. And Joe goes, oh, I didn't ask to be paid. I just told you I wanted to be your commentator. Dana looks around, man, are you serious? I can have the guy from The Man Show. I believe Fear Factor was also going on simultaneously. Joe is a big deal. I can have him, and you'll just come out and do it. And Joe said, yeah, man, I'm a fan. You give me the best seat in the house, I want to call your fights. Deal. Well, when things turned around, and particularly the way that Dana works, which is beyond fair, he makes it right with Joe. Hey, we now do have a budget. We now do have some money. And the first guy I want to make sure is paid is the guy that I have not yet paid. The reason I bring up that story isn't at all to talk money. It's to show sincerity. Somebody that is willing to do that, somebody who does not need a job, somebody who is already very busy and has a full schedule, but is willing to fly out wherever an event is and work for 6 hours at a time because he's passionate and cares, I think we can then call sincere. So when Joe sees something that he views as unfair to the athlete, you have to listen because he has been there from the beginning. And we know that his intentions are real. Here's the only bad part, if there is a bad part. Joe is in a similar spot to me, which I believe in broad stroke is probably a similar spot to all but a couple of you who've yet to come forward, which is, what's the overhaul? How do we go about this? Because there's a lot of moving parts that people don't take into consideration. You see the show, you look around at the judges. This Saturday, Joe and Dominic caught some judge not watching the fight for a meaningful period of time, a fight that ultimately went to a decision, where ultimately his scores mattered, to a fight that they caught him, and they're not watching him, they're watching a fight, they're looking over to him every now and then, they could point out 45 seconds of a round that he did not watch. Not good. We can agree that that's not good. So, the question does become, what do you do? But when you're in that spot and you think that it all just happens, you're very wrong. There's a lot of moving parts. Let me offer you an example. Just as an example, and just ponder this and take it into consideration. I'm just offering you something. Take New York. New York was the last state in the union to sanction mixed martial arts. Well, the second that happened, and after all the time spent and all the years that went by and all the politicking and hard work that went into it, boom, the UFC books event. New York legislature passes it, the Senate passes it, the governor signs the bill, it is now law, and the UFC books a venue like 45 days later. So imagine you're in charge in New York, and you now become the executive director, and by law, you must do A through Z. Oh, and should I mention, you have 45 days to do it. Imagine that scenario. Now let's imagine that you have a judging curriculum in place, a school in place, like somebody that was trying to get a journeyman's license or a college degree or a high school diploma. How long did it take you to get that diploma, guys? Took you 12 years. Now we can shorten it. What about the guy that went on to become a lawyer? Well, that took him 2 years. Okay, but that's better than 12. Well, what about the guy that wanted to go and become a real estate agent? He could do that really fast. He could do that in about 4 months. What other things out there are happening faster than that where a license is involved, that is a privileged license? I mean, what other things? We could say judging. We could do that in one day. We could get it done. But if we are now going to go off of a curriculum base, how quick is this curriculum, if it's going to be a curriculum that is thorough and is to be accepted by the masses? How fast? I don't know the answer to that. I'm asking you, how quick can that be done? Because in the case of New York, this is a true story. This happened. They had 45 days to not only set up an entire commission, which involves offices, which involves payrolls, which involves regulations, not only to get that in place, before you even put your officials there, you don't have to find out who your fighters are. You have to make sure that they're all licensed, that they're all drug tested, that they all have their medicals in, that they're all cleared, that all of the matchups that are proposed seem to make a level of sense on paper, which is largely based on how many fights have you had and what's your record. If you've had 3 fights and this guy had 3 fights, okay, that sounds pretty good, but it's still something you have to do. And the clock is ticking. So let's just say that you had a curriculum that somebody had to go through to be able to gain a license, but you were in the situation that was New York. Every single state went through this. I'm offering you New York because it was the most recent. Every single state was put in this exact same situation. Offering New York, by an example. How are they going to have any judges or officials? Well, one way that you do it is you go look for people in surrounding areas and you bring them in. Okay, that would be fine too. But did those people have time to then go through said curriculum? I mean, you see what I'm saying? I hope I'm making my point here, because the only point that I'm attempting to make is, while many of us can identify there is some issues, and when Dominic Cruz and Joe Rogan catch somebody not watching a fight that goes to the cards, it's a big problem. That's a big problem. I would also suggest for you that is a big problem for one official. I don't know that the other hundreds of officials around the country who are licensed, 90 of which were not working that night, need to then be brought in by that. I just don't know that we should do that. The fighters certainly don't want to live under that. If somebody goes out and cheats in a fight, we don't all want to be called cheaters. If somebody goes out and fails a drug test, everybody doesn't deserve to be said to be on drugs and failing tests. See what I'm saying? It sounds as though we identified a mistake that happened that night. Dana had a very good answer for it. He just had a very good look. Here's what appears to be happening. We're in Texas. Texas doesn't hold a lot of really big fights. We brought them a world title fight that, oh, by the way, happened to do a $3.8 million gate, which, by the way, happens to set the record for the arena win. Point being, we brought them a very big fight. They don't do a lot of really big fights. They could use a little bit of practice themselves. There's a lot of truth to that. There's a whole lot of truth to that, and I think that you've got other examples. Mario Yamasaki went through a very public and a very ugly thing. Adelaide Byrd made some very bizarre calls. Where the real frustration comes in my opinion, I'm speaking for Joe Rogan here, and I could be speaking wrong. But I know Joe pretty well, and I think that I'm right when I tell you Joe's frustration is the same as mine. The frustration is not with judging as a whole. The frustration that all of judging does seem to have in common is that when somebody lays an egg, Adelaide Byrd, in fairness, the judge that was caught not watching a fight that went to the cards, when one of these things happen, and they are then defended and protected by the commission, the same commission that would never defend or protect an athlete. They would pull their license, they would sanction them, they would fine them, they would demand a hearing, they would embarrass them publicly, and then they would make a decision if they wanted to continue with that athlete. That same body seems to look the other way when it happens to be a judge. I do agree that that's a little frustrating. I don't offer you a suggestion, and I would just tell you, somebody is going to need to come forward, and it's not going to be me. I want it to be me. I would like to be the guy that comes forward and offers you a solution to this problem. But guys, I don't have one. And I've been in this sport from day one as a fan. I got in this sport a few years later as a participant. I got in this sport years after that as a promoter, as a coach, back to fan. I don't have a solution. I don't have anything that I could propose, and I also haven't heard an idea yet. I'm open to it. I think somebody's got it. I think Dominic Cruz said something very wise that needs to be listened to when Dominic Cruz simply said the commissions are very closed and they don't let people in. And the commissions needs to open up and begin letting lots of people in and hearing lots of different opinions from the fighters, from the coaches, from the media. Now, how are you going to organize that? And I will also tell you, group thought, as wonderful an idea as that sounds, group thought is a pain in the ass. There has to be a decision maker. So my final analysis is quite simply, there was some bad apples, there was some bad moments, but these are human beings and they do make mistakes. The fact that nothing is done when that happens by the same authoritative bodies who would not treat any other buddy with a privileged license that way. They wouldn't let a promoter get away with making a mistake. They wouldn't let an athlete get away with making a mistake, but they do let their judges. From the Adelaide Byrd situation, in all fairness, I don't mean to pick on her, but this was bad. This was really bad, and she then got protected by the executive director, which was ridiculous. To a judge who didn't watch the fight, who nobody, including myself, is calling by name. Had it been a fighter, they'd have been called out.